What is resilience? In this Living Resilience Deep Academy series, we define it as an expansion of capacity to be present and functional in the face of larger and larger stressors. Indeed, this is a time of growing stressors. Temperature rises and sea level rise associated with climate change, extreme weather, devastating fires around the world, and now we have a global pandemic with its own immense stressors on cultures around the world, and particularly now on the United States. In addition to the public health issues of the pandemic, we are watching the systematic decimation of first the USA economy and soon to be the global economy. These are stressors at a scale and sheer volume that humanity has never seen before. Surely this is the calling for us to generate resilience. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 3 in the series called Resilience here at livingresilience.net and the online learning series library. And this particular series is called Resilience. So if you'll remember, back in episode 1, we spent virtually the whole time talking about how not to be resilient. Basically a picture of what America, what the USA has gotten itself into in 2020. And this is by no means just a flash in the pan response to the coronavirus pandemic. That was certainly one of the biggest elements that exposed America's lack of resilience and lack of essential preparation. But this has been coming on for decades. So we will be getting to some of the more in-depth causal factors in that lack of resilience in later episodes. I'd like to just recall after that session 1, in which we again just reviewed some of the elements that added up to a complete lack of resilience in the USA at this point. We went on to session 2, and session 2 was seeing resilience as the way that a community might be resilient if it picks itself up off the ground after being knocked over by a natural disaster, let's say a hurricane or a fire or that sort of thing. And we covered a lot of ground. Unfortunately, it's not very interesting ground if you aren't yourself trying to recover immediately from some kind of a disaster. This first aid level resilience really involves keeping people present or inviting them to become present again after being, again, knocked off track, knocked out of their usual level of awareness and presence by some sort of large-scale natural disaster, usually. I told you quite a bit about one of the larger organizations that I think does a great job of providing resilience skills, self-regulation, co-regulation skills to people who are in that kind of need of first aid level resilience skills. That was the community resilience model from Elaine Miller-Karras and her team. And sincerely, I hope you went out and bought that book and that you're going to, no kidding, read it. And I'm afraid that I'm not going to be more helpful this particular session either. There are some videos, there are some easy to read articles in this particular session 3 of this series. But this will also have a core book that I've already mentioned, and I hope you bought it then, and maybe you've already gotten ahead of the game and you've read it some. This is Bob Doppelt's book, uh, Transformational Resilience. When I was looking in the business as usual marketplace, if you will, when I first started researching for my book, The Impossible Conversation, I wanted to find out what's being done in the business as usual community to help people at this level of facing some sort of large, immense scale stressor as a community usually. And what are the various levels of skill sets that are being on offer? And obviously, we've already spent quite a bit of time on the more first aid level with Elaine Miller Karras's book and so on. This level is a level that implies that we've got some amount of continuity. We're still at home, and we are not necessarily up to our earlobes in a large-scale stressor. It can be done, but it would be good if there was still some amount of normalcy in your life. If you had some space to be able to read, possibly even read this material together. I think Bob Doppelt has done just a tremendous job of putting together what is the boldest, closest to being collapse aware business as usual perspective that I've seen. I don't know if he coined it, but he certainly brought a tremendous distinction to the term post-traumatic growth. The idea being that he has been predicting that we would start to see large-scale stressors on communities, for instance, natural disaster after natural disaster, which is bucking the trend that we've most of us grown up with, which is something big happens to a community and they have a few years to gather their wits back about them and to rebuild, and to indeed work on their resilience together over time. Bob Doppelt's prediction, which did turn out to be true just a couple of years after he released the book. I'm thinking particularly of Hurricane Harvey down in Houston area, and then there was, Puerto Rico, and there within a couple of years there were nearly a dozen world-class, huge, destructive natural disasters. And now, of course, we have the combination of both human-caused and what we would consider natural disasters going on at the same time. Let's take just a couple of moments to just look at the title of Bob Doppelt's book, Transformational Resilience. So that's the level we're at. And ironically, I'm just calling this on our scale, I'm calling this an advanced practice level. And number 4, the next session, I'm actually calling transformative. It is fair to say that there's quite a bit of overlap here. And what makes Bob's description of and definition of transformational resilience unique is that he is basically asserting that with some robust inner skills, things that are far more than just the first aid level that Elaine Miller Karras offered us last session, you'll be finding out quite a bit about some of these advanced inner skills sets that we can build for ourselves and for our family members or members of our organizations, communities, and so on. These are skill sets that are easily within reach of just about anyone. Chances are, if you've done anything like life coaching or have had a robust therapeutic relationship where the therapist is offering you life skills development, it's possible that you've been engaged in these kind of activities before, and we'll get to those in just a few moments. But the definition of Bob Doppelt's work, transformational resilience, the difference is if the usual kind of run-of-the-mill description of or definition of resilience is when life knocks you down, you dust yourself off and get back up and get back on the path that you were on. Well, that's simplistic. And again, Bob Doppelt has predicted a lot more than just being knocked down once and picking yourself back up. He's gone on to suggest that it's possible to not just survive or endure some large scale stressor and to get ourselves back as quickly as we can to the place that we were before. He's actually suggesting that there's a transformative option, that it's possible, instead of just enduring or surviving, that it's possible in midstream, in the middle of the disastrous event or the large scale stressor, in the middle of it, we can find ourselves with enough inner resources to be able to, again, not just survive or endure, but possibly learn and grow and possibly even thrive in the midst of the stressor itself, and certainly within a far shorter than usual time period after whatever the stressor is. It's quite an amazing assertion, if you will, that he puts out in his book, and his association for transformational resilience. All these links are here on the screen and in the workbook packet for this series. And so I hope you'll look him up. I'm really sincere in when I request, please read this book. It is a heck of a strong skill set for the business as usual portion of the population who's going to be interested enough to do this work in the first place. But it's also nudging right up into the foundational level, that smaller circle in the diagram. And for those who are sincere and dive deep into this work, it is quite possible that it'll be a helpful vehicle to take you into the transformative level, which is where we're obviously pointing to and heading toward in session 4 in this series. So one of the elements that Bob Doppelt puts into his book, Transformational Resilience, is something that he calls presencing. And that's really where his work and Elaine Miller-Karras's community resilience model work that we learned about last time, this is where they overlap. The idea is to be self-aware enough to be able to craft your presence, to have options with regard to your presence, even in the middle of an extremely stressful situation. It's, again, quite a wild assertion, and it's a robust set of exercises and distinctions and lessons that he has in his book. It is really well worth pursuing these advanced track elements that Bob Doppelt includes in his work. He's got another distinction that I wanted to be sure to bring out for you before, perhaps it's before you've read the book, I don't know. And he calls that purposing. And with purposing, it's really to find out, if you have the time, if you have some amount of time out ahead of some large scale stressor, what are some of the inner elements that you could have spent some time crafting and building out that would be useful to be able to fall back on, to be able to use as an inner source of resilience within yourself, make you more difficult to knock over, to knock out of your comfort zone or your resilience zone. And this idea of purposing is to dive deep into finding out what really matters most to you. This may sound simple, and it truly is on paper, but most of us don't have that really well articulated. And especially as we get busier and busier in our lives, we might have done it in our early 20s, let's say, as we were aiming toward what will our career be? Will I have a family? And so on. there are precious few who actually take the time to revamp that list, revamp that sense of purpose and meaning, and to look at what matters most to me in this life now that I'm at 30, 40, 50 years old. These are important milestones in any life. And this is the kind of looking and the kind of deep exercise that Bob Doppelt is offering in Transformational Resilience. So there's one last piece of, there's one particular piece of the support materials that are in session 3 of this online learning series that I really want to draw your attention to. I think they're all worth watching, and I've included as many accessible and inexpensive resources as I could find that go directly to the kind of stressors and the kind of resilience skills that we all will be needing in the coming years. This one in particular, I just really strongly suggest you check it out. And it really doesn't matter if you're a parent or not. This happens to be directly excerpted from our sister podcast, Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams. And you can subscribe to that podcast and that special series of curated content in the same place that you signed up for this and any other Living Resilience series. So within that series, one of the folks that really helped, was significant help in putting together that content and that series, is a woman named Becca, at the time, Becca Martinson. And she has since returned to her maiden name, Becca Young Allen. And at the time when we first began talking, and certainly in the first few interviews that I had with her and her then husband, Chris Martinson, they both had created quite a remarkable niche. They both had left the corporate world, the business as usual world, and they were in the thick of it. And they both just obviously came together as the core of their family, as the mother and father in this family. And they consciously created an alternative. And so there's an entire series that I did with Becca as she disclosed a number of the elements that really kept her and Chris sane during those years. That's called Transformational Resilience is the name of that series, and that also can be found in the Deep Academy page of the Living Resilience website. So this video that I'm suggesting that you watch here in session 3 of the Resilience series is Becca and her 2 daughters, Grace and Erica. And I just had the absolute pleasure of interviewing all 3 of them together. And I've included this because it's one of the most extraordinary examples of how we might answer the question, what does a family that's resilient and collapse aware and connected, what does it look like?
It's there's a question of like responsibility. Like if you break responsibility down, it becomes responsibility. So given that I'm lucky to like be surrounded by people that aren't afraid to look at the like hard truths of this world, and kind of grew up with them, with an awareness of them, of climate change and terrible economy, and just all of the many broken systems. It's like growing now that I have an awareness of all of these issues. What's my responsibility to respond to them in a good way? And Um, and like if I'm holding that as a question, what does my life look like then? Um, how am I living my life as if it's an answer to that question?
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast.
For most of
podcast
us,
for
we
people
don't
brave enough
have
to
that
face
as any reference for that. For if you're anything like my family, it was a broken home, multiple divorces. We didn't have much in the way of resilience. We were struggling all the time. We had minimal resilience or self-regulation or co-regulation skills at all. We wouldn't know those terms if they hit us over the head. So just look for yourself and see how many references you have for a successful family being created with a foundation of resilient skills, self-regulation, co-regulation, and a deep commitment to a fully responsible presence in the world, both individually and as a family, and also as a contributing element in a vibrant community. You'll hear about all those things. I hope you will consider signing up for just joining the Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams podcast and set of content. But at the very least, please check out that interview with Becca and Erica and Grace. So that's it for this moment. We're going to be having quite a bit of material for you here in session 3. And then before you know it, it'll be time to move into session 4, which is obviously at the top of that very simple diagram that starts us out with business as usual, gets us into this foundational level of resilience skills. And we're already bumping up into that transformative level. And noticing again that that's the smallest of the circles, representing the smallest number of people who will end up getting in themselves into that realm. It's tough work. You'll hear about some of that work with Becca and Grace and Erica. I hope that isn't too daunting. My sense is that this particular threshold that we're in right now, and we're going to be heading more into not only in session 4, but in just about all the work from here out, this is an extraordinary way to be encountering and facing into the most challenging time in human history. So thank you again for participating in this work. Hope you find this valuable. Please check out and read Bob Doppelt's book, and be in touch with us to let us know how else we can serve you in a good way for this particularly important topic of resilience. See you next session.
what is resilience? In this Living Resilience Deep Academy series, we define it as an expansion of capacity to be present and functional in the face of larger and larger stressors. Indeed, this is a time of growing stressors. Temperature rises and sea level rise associated with climate change, extreme weather, devastating fires around the world, and now we have a global pandemic with its own immense stressors on cultures around the world, and particularly now on the United States. In addition to the public health issues of the pandemic, we are watching the systematic decimation of first the USA economy and soon to be the global economy. These are stressors at a scale and sheer volume that humanity has never seen before. Surely this is the calling for us to generate resilience.